Marilyn Monroe, Akashic Records, Soul Reading Part 2. If you've not already seen Part 1, definitely go and check that out first. It's linked in the playlist below. Otherwise, you will likely be very confused. So as always, this is just information I've picked up through a reading. It's obviously not factual information and I very well could be wrong, so just take what resonates and leave what doesn't. So continuing from part 1, obviously Marilyn had been heavily subjected to programming via MK Ultra's Monarch program. So Marilyn was being used to gather intel on prominent men through intimacy and take it back to the CIA. Now, when her baby was unalived, as I mentioned in the first video, this caused a massive awakening within her, and all of the MK Ultra programming started to break down. She started to gain her inner power and her strength, and with what happened to her baby, it very much gave her this fuel to expose things and take things down. Whereas beforehand the programming had been very successful, she did have elements of DID because of the amount of programming and trauma that had been inflicted on her, and they can basically just use a trigger word and it causes them to go into a different personality. So with Marilyn, she was actually very smart, very intelligent and very, very fiercely strong, but with this alter ego that the MK Ultra programming had caused, it caused her to come across as a dumb blonde, so to speak, but that is in no way what her true personality was. So in her later years, everyone who was around her were handlers of some sort. There was no one around her that she could trust, which is incredibly, incredibly sad. When I've looked into Marilyn, what I'm seeing is out of all of the men that she was involved with, Joe DiMaggio was the one who truly loved her, so I'm not seeing him as having had any involvement with her programming or anything else, but her handlers wanted them to split up. So the reason that they split up was because of her programming. All they need to do is send a trigger word through and it causes her to react. And she was getting increasingly paranoid. They were planting information in her head about Joe, and ultimately that's what split them up. But I do feel that he truly loved her and had her best interests at heart. Arthur Miller was heavily involved in her downfall, essentially. Being shown that she was constantly getting locked up into psychiatric wards or rehabs was the story, but actually she was constantly getting sent away for more extensive programming, and she was heavily rugged as well. Even when she managed to get away with Arthur, and the reason that she was allowed to do that was because it didn't matter by that point. She was so heavily surrounded. Even the doctors and everything that she was working with, they were all involved in it. So as I said before, her programming broke down and she was no longer able to be controlled, but she kept up the pretense that she was. So a lot of the prominent men that they were getting her to gather intel on was actually mob members, and Frank Sinatra being one of that. I think it's pretty much well known that Frank Sinatra was heavily involved with the mob. Definitely need to do a separate reading on him. I get very bad vibes from Frank Sinatra. So then she was to gather information. Her next mission was the Kennedys. So going into her relationship with JFK now. So when I'm looking into that, I'm actually not getting through that they did have intimacy relations. I'm getting through that it was a pretense that they did, because by that point all of her programming had wore down, and quite honestly, she had been through so much trauma by that point that even for her to give herself to a man at that point would have been extremely traumatic for her. She was scarred because essentially what she had been was passed from man to man and exploited in the worst ways, and it's just incredibly sad. When she met JFK, She recognised a kindred spirit within him. They were both old souls and both had a lot of light in them. Again, this doesn't mean to say that people are perfect. These people are surrounded by darkness their whole lives, and people who are surrounded by darkness trying to lead them astray. And yes, they will have made poor choices, but ultimately these people were very much more for the light. So when she met JFK, she did actually trust him, and they began to confide in each other, and she ended up telling JFK everything that had happened to her. And JFK was already trying to dismantle the CIA, so this gave him further fuel. I do feel that he did genuinely care for Marilyn, and felt very protective over her as well. So what I'm seeing is they had concocted like a plan to bring them down. So Marilyn was feeding back information to the CIA that would throw them off scent. However, they began to see through that, and I'm getting that she was betrayed as well and towards her unaliving. So looking into the night of her passing, I'm just going to remote view and see what I can see. So I'm not going to lie, I think that's the first time that I've actually remote viewed something where I feel a bit starstruck seeing Marilyn. What I'm seeing is incredibly sad. So going to the night of Marilyn's passing, she was hysterical and screaming down the phone and just screaming. And what I'm being shown is she knew that her time was up. I'm being shown that there was essentially two hits on her. One, the mob, and two, the CIA. So both had put hits on her because she had essentially been gathering information about the mob, feeding back to CIA, and also the CIA knew that she was now a liability and she knew far too much and could essentially bring them down. So it's well known that, I don't know if it was the last person or one of the last people that she spoke to was Bobby Kennedy. I've not looked into him yet, but I will do so in a separate video. But what I can see is her screaming down the phone and saying, you need to do something and you need to do something quick. I don't have long left. And she's saying Frankie betrayed me. So I believe Frank Sinatra had something to do with her passing, or that he's essentially passed on the information to the mob and was the reason why one of the hits were out on her. I'm not seeing the Kennedys as being involved in her passing. So now looking into what actually happened and who was responsible. So yes, I'm definitely feeling that she was unalived. I think pretty much everyone has that belief around Marilyn's passing, but what I'm getting through is it was the CIA that was responsible for it. But I'm also seeing that the CIA and the mob then became intertwined and started working together. So very prominent members of the mob were now working with the CIA. So what I'm seeing in regards to her passing is a doctor. So I'm seeing a doctor coming in and saying that he was going to give her something, so injection, to calm her down, but she knew what was going to happen and she was hysterical, and this is actually really sad, to be honest. So she was pinned down, and I'm getting quite emotional just saying this, but the look of kind of terror in her eyes, she was very, very scared. And what they've gave her is they've gave her something that stops the heart immediately but goes undetected, and she knew that it was her end. She knew that it wasn't something to calm her down. But what I'm seeing is her very last moments, which is giving me more comfort seeing this. She was surrounded by angels and she actually seen them in her last moments, and just this feeling of peace washed over her, and she knew that she was going home, and ultimately she was happy to be going home. So Marilyn's passing, the same as JFK's, caused a mass awakening as well, and this is when conspiracy theories first started to come about. Not only that, but looking at Marilyn's legacy now and what she left behind, so many women resonate to her. She was an icon of female empowerment, and she did an incredible job when she was here. So God bless you, Marilyn. She's definitely at peace now. And even though there was some awful people doing things to her, body, her soul had left by then. As always, let me know your thoughts in the comments.